Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM. Welcome to another edition of Food Farm Talk, where we celebrate food and honor those who champion the cause of food in society.
Welcome to Food Farm Talk on CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph and on podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, and Anchor. We're broadcasting here from the treaty lands of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation of the Anishinaabe Nation. The lands we now call Guelph have been home to the Attawandaron, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe people over the millennia. Today, many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people live and learn here, like myself as a citizen of the Métis Nation. I'm Paul Smith, and I'll be a guest host on a series of shows on farm sustainability on Food Farm Talk. These shows will be about the many different aspects of farm sustainability. I'm going to draw on my experience of working on these issues for almost 2 decades. So, what is farm sustainability? Today we're going to introduce that topic on a general level. Over the series, we're going to dig deep into the meaning of farm sustainability for farms in Ontario and Canada and how this differs from farms in other parts of the world. Over time, we're going to explore many aspects of sustainability, including nutrient management, soil health, biodiversity, land use, pest management, organic and alternative agriculture, tillage, and many other topics. So we want to go beyond the headlines, beyond our often cartoon versions of what agriculture is, and get into more substantive discussions about the real topics. We want to challenge people's thinking. So today we're going to talk generally about what farm sustainability is and how it can be assessed or measured. And next time we're going to bring that thinking home to Ontario and Canada and how it might be applied to farms here. And obviously the sustainability concept links environmental, economic, and social sustainability, or in the short form is planet, people, profit. How do we think about sustainability? Do we assess sustainability for a farm or an entire food system, a supply chain, or a landscape or a watershed, or all of those? How do we assess whether a particular farm or landscape is sustainable? What indicators or criteria do we use? How do words like organic, biodynamic, regenerative, conservation, integrated, or veganomic even fit into all this? Well, we'll explore those in other shows in this series. All this crazy terminology and jargon have led to what Nick Betts calls sustainababble. And we'll talk about that when we interview Nick a bit later in this show. Action on farm sustainability has become focused on the sustainable sourcing of food and products from the farm. And so this show is going to talk about that. Sustainable sourcing is about systems that ensure farms and businesses that food companies obtain their food and ingredients from meet certain sustainability criteria. So this might result in that logo on food packaging or in the food company's profile website or annual reports. There are many different systems for sustainability assessment for sourcing of food, and we're going to delve into one of those in particular today, the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, when we talk to Nick Betts. But there are other competing systems, whether from individual companies, industry organizations, NGOs, or groups of stakeholders. So it's important to note that most of these sustainable sourcing systems do not increase revenues for farmers. In fact, they increase costs through the processing and so on. But they are becoming necessary for gaining market access or even retaining market access, particularly for certain kinds of markets like the European food market. So let's start by going back to that general concept of farm sustainability to start us off. The state of agriculture differs between developed and developing countries, and sustainable sourcing systems have to look at both of those situations. So let's listen to a spokesperson for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations to describe, in their terms, what sustainable agriculture is.
Agriculture is feeding the world's 7.3 billion people, but at an unbearable social and environmental cost. 1/3 of the world's land is degraded, up to 75% of crop genetic diversity has been lost, and more than half of fish stocks are fully exploited. At the same time, about 800 million people are undernourished. How is FAO addressing these challenges?
For us, for FAO, sustainable food in agriculture is something that's one of the most important issues for food security, for nutrition, for improving livelihoods. We cannot keep the level of natural resource degradation that we have now, so this is unsustainable. We need actually to look at more adaptation and resilience to climate change, and also we need to increase productivity. So we are not just looking at the production, but also we need to consider the enhancement and the protection of the natural resources, basically the ecosystem services and biodiversity. The concept of sustainable food in agriculture also consider the improvement of livelihoods, well-being, and gender equity.
So you can hear the FAO's perspective there, where they emphasize the need for increased production as well as the usual people, planet, and profit to feed the growing population of the world. And they also go on to talk about sustainable intensification of agriculture. So that's a global perspective. Let's now turn to another source, a Canadian perspective from the Canadian Roundtable on Sustainable Beef. And as you'll hear in this clip, this is a collection of stakeholders, including farmers and other stakeholders, working through collaboratively what they can agree are criteria for sustainable practices to define the certification systems or assurance systems they're talking about. So listen to this.
We have a number of different stakeholders who are part of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. That includes everybody from environmental organizations, animal care, agriculture and food business, retail and food service, and of course the beef producers, as they're the ones who are managing out there on the landscape. The Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef has 3 core areas of work. The first area is sustainability benchmarking, so looking at sustainability comprehensively from the economic, environmental and social perspectives as to how is the Canadian beef industry performing, and then setting strategies to continually advance that performance. The second core area of work is around building a verified sustainable beef supply chain here in Canada to be able to truly verify that those outcomes are happening on those operations that choose to partake in a verification program. And the third core area of work is around projects, so sustainability projects that continually advance the sustainability of the Canadian beef sector.
So to provide another perspective, let's go to Syngenta CEO Eric Fierwald, and he'll provide what their perspective is on sustainability. So Syngenta is a large multinational seed and plant protection company based in Switzerland and sells farmers lots of products for their businesses and their production systems around the world. Have a listen.
I think it's really important that agriculture not only feeds the world, but also does it in a way that takes care of our planet. Farmers want to take care of their farms well. They want to feed their families, they want to feed their communities, they want to sell their products to make money, to educate their families, but they also care deeply about the environment. We as an industry and we as an agriculture food value chain need to work together to get wonderful, safe, affordable, healthy foods to consumers all over the world, but do it in a way that protects our planet. We realize that we, Syngenta, have to listen to farmers, food companies, food retailers, NGOs, and to government regulators in an open conversation about what really is sustainable agriculture.
So you've heard a variety of perspectives on what sustainability is from different stakeholders, and now we're going to talk in some depth with Nick Betts about all of these issues to delve more deeply into them. I'm here with Nick Betts. Nick Betts works for the Sustainable Agricultural Initiative, and we're going to talk about farm sustainability today. And Nick's been working in this field for quite some time, and we'll start off by Nick, if we can get you to tell me a bit about yourself and a bit of your background, how you ended up working for Sustainable Agricultural Initiative, and we'll talk more about and maybe the second part could be talking about the organization, and we'll talk more about the farm sustainability assessment stuff a bit later.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Paul. I kind of fell into this position. I did my undergrad in Guelph in ecology, and following that, I got into agriculture because there were jobs in agriculture. I grew up in rural Ontario, but not on a farm. And once I got involved with the Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association, I really figured out that there needed to be more work done on this confluence of environment and farming and consumer-driven demand, and sustainability really popped for me. So I did more schooling in sustainability and ended up with an MBA from a university in England, Cumbria University, that had an MBA focus on sustainability. And from there, I went up into the Grain Farmers of Ontario, working in sustainable agriculture, and really trying to work with the farmers on being able to understand and translate what sustainability means on farm to the people who are buying our product and using our product. And then after spending some time with OMAFRA doing similar jobs, I'm now a recovering government employee, working for myself, but contracted mainly through the SAI Platform or SAI Platform, where I represent them in many of their projects and North American and South American work. So the SAI Platform itself it's an organization, it's an NGO made up of companies, food and drink companies, everything from farm cooperatives through the supply chain to retailers and end users, including big brands. Some of our name brands you'll see on the shelves all over Canada and everywhere around the world. We have about 110 members that pay annual dues or fees to us, and part of that role that we do then is to harness the collaborative power of those members to really spread widespread adoption of sustainability practices on farm. So we deal with farm level sustainability only. The initiative started 17 years ago. It's global in nature.
Sustainability is not a particularly new concept. It's been around for, as you know, from the 80s, maybe from before you were born, right? And so that idea of the three pillars, people, profit, planet, or social, environmental, and economic, is not particularly new. And so that you've been involved in this for a while, and it's now kind of come to how it applies to food and farming. So maybe you can talk about how you see, or how your organization and how you see the definitions of sustainability, what they are, and how it applies to agriculture, and how you may have seen that evolve over the last number of years.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. So, I mean, in Canada, sustainability on the farm is really largely suited to the environment. Because we have a very regulated social system, when people think of sustainability in farming in Canada and Ontario, it's really focused on the environment: soil quality, water quality, air quality. But in actual sense, that factor, the environmental quality piece of sustainability, is just one of those three pillars, as you mentioned, or like I try to refer to them as spheres, because they're all overlapping. They're never mm-hmm. independent from each other. So there's a social aspect to that. There's an economic aspect to that for the farm and the community. And then the environmental aspect. So the challenge we have today, and it's growing more and more from the time I started in this, is that we have what we call sustainababble. And
I like it.
So Robert Engelman, I can't say I coined the phrase, Robert Engelman did, and he said that we live in an age of sustainababble, which is a cacophonous profusion of the terms sustainable to mean everything from environmentally better to cool. And it's not. As a sustainability nerd, that's horrible. That's the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah.
So how I like to see sustainability and how the SAI Platform really functions is that sustainability is this value-laden umbrella, in the sense that it's this overarching umbrella that has all of these different aspects and pillars or features underneath it, whether it's soil quality or worker safety or economic performance of the farm or market diversity. All of these things interrelate with each other, and it's a very complex interface. And it's that interface between the human environment and the society and then the natural environment that's not easy to grasp, which is why we have that sustainababble, that cacophonous profusion of the term.
So when you say that from a Canadian perspective, it's mostly focused on the environment, but from a global perspective, in other, I guess that we're trying to get at is the differences between what it means in different parts of the world.
Right.
So the social side may be different, more important in the developing world, for example.
Right. Yeah. So we have. I mean, as Canadians, we eat a lot of food from Asia and Africa and South America, where they don't have the social systems or the social framework in place that we have. And in those situations, the biggest sustainability hurdles, or the highest priority issues, are probably social. Because if you don't fix the social issues, nobody's going to ever care about the environmental issues. If I'm a farmer, if I can't feed my family, I'm not going to prioritize the creek or the watershed-based health over that of my 2-year-old son.
So sustainability is become focused on the sustainable sourcing thing,
right?
And being a market-driven piece, but it wasn't always so, right? So when we talked about there's different ways of looking at it, right? You can look at landscape, if you're in an ag landscape sustainability or provincial or national scale, the entire food system sustainability, you can do that kind of assessment, or individual businesses is what we've seemed to have ended up with.
Right.
But maybe there's an interplay between all of these. So those, the agri-environmental indicators or sustainability metrics, that was one attempt to look at sustainability on a national scale for the agricultural industry. And then you have crop sustainability systems,
right.
Beef, dairy, other commodities, and then what you folks are doing is kind of the overarching one too. So this is a lot of complexity, right? And so you got individual retailers will have their systems too, right?
Exactly.
So maybe you can talk about those different approaches and how they fit together or not, right? And maybe they're conflicting in.
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes down to it, sustainability is a public good. It has to do with the public good. So government, in all respects, could and should, in my opinion, be a leader in this. The challenge is the marketplace and farm buyers, people who are buying things from a farm, can modulate their systems far faster than the government can change that giant boat that is the government to face in a different direction. So I think that's why it's been taken up by the industry, is because they can move across governments. They can be a little more agile than governments have the ability to be. All the work that's been done in Canada on the metrics and the indicators is probably one of the best foundations globally from a national level that we have. That's looking at European countries, the US, other countries as well. It's an incredible piece of work that our system is built on, which is great. But from there, we have all the companies that are trying to sell things to consumers. And when you sell things to consumers, you want to differentiate yourself from the competition. So I want my farmers to do something better than your farmers. And that causes a problem for a farmer, because probably then those two systems are different. And as a farmer, if I want to diversify my income and become, or have the ability to, I probably have to do now 2 sets of work instead of 1. So largely those schemes are competitive. And that's one of the reasons why the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative started, was 3 of the biggest food companies globally 17 years ago, Danone, Nestle, and Unilever got together and said, we can all do this separately, or we can try to speak with one voice to the farmer and still have our own schemes or systems that we deal with. But from us to a farmer, business to business, when we're talking through our supply chain, we're going to ask the same things. Sustainability is going to mean the same thing.
There are different systems. So how does SAI, there's competing certification systems, right? Mm-hmm. So the states have one, what is it?
Field to market.
Field to market, which seems to be the predominant model. Mm-hmm. And then Canada doesn't really have one yet, but potentially it's the Sustainable Agricultural Initiative one. Mm-hmm. And Europe has at least one. So this is kind of the part of the confusion, right?
Exactly.
And so how do you see that evolving? I know you're an advocate for one in particular, but how do you see, how have you seen that evolve in the last few years?
Yeah. Well, personally and professionally, I'm actually not an advocate for any of them. I think the reason why they exist is because we don't trust through the supply chain anymore. So when people lived on farm and you ate on the farm and your food came from your neighbors, you trusted what food was grown. As we become an increasingly less agrarian society globally, society moves further and further away from the farm. We need to do something to build that trust that was tacitly there in the past.
Interesting.
And certifications, verifications, standardization, that's what we've done to try to accomplish that. We've tried to say, you should still trust us like you did 200 years ago.
So like an antidote for the shrinking amount of the population that's involved in food and agriculture.
It really is, yeah.
So you can't, we're so divorced from it now that this is a legalistic, if you like, or a rules-based approach to kind of building the trust again.
It really is. I mean, if I buy a chocolate bar, I don't know where that cocoa's made. I don't know. I mean, if I'm a general consumer, I don't know where it's made. I don't know how it's even grown or picked, maybe. So why would I trust that it's done effectively if I know absolutely nothing about the system? So that's why certifications, and if you look in the grocery store, our certifications around food are typically around the more complex systems, or things we don't know a lot about. So processed fish, or tea, or coffee, or cocoa, or different forestry products. People don't even know how their toilet paper is made. So why would we trust that it's done responsibly, way back down the line?
And one of the other things we were talking about a bit earlier is the consumer versus the investor. And that's, maybe you can talk a bit about that, because I think that's the important part. Is most people, I think the average person would think this is all about the consumer, right? So you're trying to have a sticker on the box that will let them ease their mind when they buy something.
Right. And
so you were saying that it's actually more about the investor than about the consumer, but there's obviously an interaction.
It's a very complex interaction where you have a corporation, essentially, you have investors, and you have consumers. Very simplified. They all relate to each other, but the company really requires those investors to be able to sell something to the consumers. So when it comes down to why they make decisions for sustainability, it usually has to do predominantly with de-risking the organization for the investor. So an example would be, like we talked earlier, with if there was a labor issue with a supply chain, if there was child labor or bonded labor, forced labor that was found in a supply chain of company ABC, their stock would plummet if that went through the news. Many people would still buy that product because they don't listen to the news. But the people who are trading their stock on Wall Street, in London, in Asia, would sell. And if their stock price drops, a lot of people either lose their jobs or don't get paid, or something happens in a macroeconomic perspective that is bad for that organization. So when we're talking about a company doing something, if they know that there's a potential for this kind of labor issue in their supply chain, they want to address it. And they don't want to address it necessarily because it's, we just have to do it. But they know that there is an intrinsic good thing for addressing it. But two, they need to address it so that that risk doesn't exist. And this comes back to that system I mentioned earlier, where a farmer needs to make money and have a good livelihood. The better that livelihood, the more they're going to sell to the people who they're selling a product to, the more sustainable that company will be. So it all flows back to the farmer.
Yeah. So maybe let's pick up on that point about the food activism and the marketplace and the companies. And so as we were just talking a little bit about that it is the food activism that is sort of the backdrop for driving food companies to buy into a system like you're developing. So maybe you just talk a bit about how that works from your perspective, how the companies are influenced. And
so the members of of SAI Platform are really they're our clients, just like any other client I have outside of the SAI Platform work that I do. They're the ones that get to try to make sense of the background noise or static, and that static includes the investors, that static includes market costs of products and ingredients they're trying to source. It includes the food activists, like you mentioned, and they all play a role in trying to figure out what the consumer is going to buy from a market perspective, but also what they can source. So being able to maintain a source on a product is very important. So it's a different spin on the way people see these quote big bad companies. I work with really good people in these companies that are actually trying to make good solid change with farmers and doing a really good job of it.
thank you for listening to Food Farm Talk here on CFRU 93.3 FM in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. You've heard a variety of perspectives on farm sustainability and on, more specifically, on sustainable sourcing. So I hope you've learned something, and I certainly did. Thanks for listening. The next show in the series will look at how these sorts of sustainable sourcing systems could be used in Ontario, like the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative's Farm Sustainability Assessment Tool, and how it might link with Environmental Farm Plan, a tool that's more familiar to Ontario farmers. So I'd just like to end by thanking Nick Betts, who gave his time to be interviewed for this. He's a very knowledgeable guy. And also thank Abdul and Emily, who are the regular hosts of Food Farm Talk, for letting me join their team. And to Cameron, who's also joining the Food Farm Talk team as a guest host like myself. So until next time, thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to Food Farm Talk. See you next week for another exciting edition.